This was Sandra Williams prior to October 20th, 2012. A devoted wife of 28 years, a mother of two outstanding sons, a marathoner, a 25-year employee of the Columbus, Georgia City Attorney's Office, an active churchgoer, and an amazing singer in the church choir. That life Sandra once knew came to a screeching halt when she had an extremely unfortunate and life-changing experience on October 20th, 2012 at Columbus, Georgia's St. Francis Hospital with Dr. Erik Westerlund, who failed to properly treat her for a post-operative neck hematoma or blood clot, which closed off her trachea and ultimately helped starve her brain of oxygen. Now meet Sandra Williams today. Sandra suffered brain damage that led to blindness and a loss of coordination and balance that resulted in confinement to a wheelchair, all as a result of the negligence and incompetence of Dr. Erik Westerlund. On December 11, 2017, a Georgia jury returned a verdict for the amount of $26 million for Sandra Williams and against St. Francis Hospital for medical malpractice, and assessed all of the blame to Dr. Erik Westerlund in this insider exclusive network TV special, Dr. Erik Westerlund's $26 million verdict medical malpractice loss. Sandra Williams' story. Our news team visits with her attorney, Lloyd Bell, of the Bell Law Firm. He will explain how the jury found that Dr. Erik Westerlund acted in bad faith and how the jury sent a powerful message to the hospital and Westerlund with the largest verdict, $26 million, against St. Francis and Dr. Erik Westerlund. This is the Insider Exclusive, live from Atlanta, Georgia. It is my great pleasure to introduce Lloyd Bell to the show. Welcome to the show, Lloyd.
Thank you.
Tell our audience a little bit about your law firm. What do you specialize in?
Specialize in medical malpractice. I've been a medical malpractice lawyer now for over 20 years, and I've been helping people who've been victims of malpractice or family members who've lost loved ones due to malpractice for over 20 years. And
you come from a medical family. Your dad was a doctor, wasn't he?
He was. He was a surgeon, and he encouraged me to go to medical school.
And why is that?
I think he just thought that it'd be great to be a doctor, and I was on that path. And I went to college and was pre-med, and realized that that was not my calling. I enjoy the classes, but I knew that that was not the path I wanted to be on.
Today we are here to talk about a extraordinary medical malpractice case. Tell us about this case and your client, Sandra Williams.
I had the great privilege of representing Sandy Williams, who is a lovely lady from Columbus, Georgia, who worked at the local bank, very active in her church. And Sandy went into the hospital because she had some neck pain, and she met with her doctor, and he said she needs a neck surgery. So she had a routine, what they call a fusion neck surgery. Well, she went in for the surgery, and surgery went okay. She woke up, she had some difficulty swallowing, but nothing too alarming. She was sent home. She came back a few days later, and her neck was swollen. She couldn't swallow her own saliva. She was having pain, and the ER doctor recognized that she had what's called a hematoma, which is a large blood clot in her neck. Mm-hmm. And they called the on-call physician to come in and let him know what's going on, and he didn't come in to see her for over 6.5 hours.
And that was?
That was Dr. Westerlund, Dr. Erik Westerlund, who is a spine surgeon at who worked at St. Francis Hospital in Columbus.
Well, as the case developed, why didn't he come to see her after 6 hours? I mean, during that time.
That was a question that was never answered satisfactorily. He said that it wasn't necessary for him to come in. He claimed at one point that he did come in.
He lied.
We concluded he did not tell the truth on that point because he claimed he came in, and the records showed that he did not. Right. So,
and you were able to show that he checked the records, right? But he didn't go see the patient, correct?
Well,
or he said he
claimed he did. Yeah. He claimed he came when he came into the hospital that morning and pulled up the X-rays off of what's called a PAC system, which is the computer system, and we got the audit trail and showed that that was not true, which I think undermined his credibility with the jury.
What happened as a result of him not attending to his patient?
Well, Sandy sat in the ICU for hour after hour after hour. No doctor came in to see her. Yeah. And eventually, when Dr. Westerlund finally did get to see her, she was already sliding over the cliff and suffered respiratory failure, where her airway was closed up. She couldn't breathe. And her oxygen levels plummeted. She turned blue. And by the time they were able to get her airway protected, get a tube down her windpipe, she had already suffered irreversible brain damage.
She's no longer the person that she used to be.
She's not at all in some ways. She still has her joy and her beauty, and her mind is intact, but she is now blind. She can't walk. Her speech is affected. Yeah. It's changed her entire life.
One of the reasons we do these stories is because when something happens like this, rarely do you have a doctor or a hospital come forward and say, we screwed up.
That is very true.
And as you well know, trying all these cases, many of these cases, oftentimes people believe the men in the white coats, don't they? When they come forward, we did everything we could.
You know, there's definitely a bias in favor of the medical community. I mean, nobody wants to think that a nurse is going to be negligent or that a doctor is not going to do, his or her job. Mm-hmm. But the reality is that they're people, and people make mistakes, and people, unfortunately, tend to try to cover up their mistakes on occasion rather than owning up to it.
Right.
And that's the problem. That was the problem here, is that they knew what they did, but they didn't come out and do the right thing.
So when Sandy came to you and her family came to you, what were some of the legal challenges you were facing, as in many medical malpractice cases? What did you have to show?
Well, in Georgia, you have to show that there has been malpractice before you can file your lawsuit. Right. So when you file your lawsuit, you have to file it with an affidavit from a physician identifying at least one negligent act.
That's where your expert comes in.
That's right. So that is designed to prevent the so-called filing of baseless lawsuits.
Yeah. But then it becomes a battle of the experts, doesn't it?
It's a big part of it. It's a big part of it.
Because then it's up to the jury to determine who's, let's say, telling a better story, right?
Well, the jury understands more than a lot of people give them credit for. Mm-hmm. And even though you have experts talking about the medicine, juries are very wise at identifying what's really going on, whose story makes the most sense.
Tell us the problems that lawyers have when they want to find an expert to testify for their client in a case. It's hard to find them, right? And why is that?
It's hard to find experts in the community where the malpractice took place. And the reason for that is politics. Doctors who work in even a large metropolitan area very rarely will agree to testify against another physician who practices in the same community. They're worried about the politics. They're worried about negative feedback from the hospital.
They're also worried about being ostracized and loss of income.
Well, that's a part of it, sure.
Yeah. It's all about money when it really comes down to it.
It's a big part of it. And some reputation, position in the community, professional standing, all of that plays into it. It's a real challenge. So a lot of times we have to go outside the city of Atlanta or even the state of Georgia to find experts who are willing to put their name and support the lawsuit.
Yeah. Now, in this case, you had to show the doctor, and I would quote, failed to follow the standard of care.
That's right.
Okay. What does that mean? Because a lot of people hear about, that term. What does it mean, fail to follow the standard of care? What does that mean?
Well, the easiest way to understand it is the standard of care is just a medical term for following the rules of the road.
Right.
When we drive cars around the highways, we have to follow the rules of the road. Stop at a green light, yield, entering the highway. Medical professionals have to follow their rules of the road, and they call it the standard of care. But it means they have to put dirty needles in the right receptacle. They have to wash their hands before surgery. They have to show up to see a patient after they admit her to the ICU within a certain period of time.
Right.
If they don't do that, then they can be responsible.
In this particular case, what were you able to show?
Well, we were able to show that there was a rule in place that if a physician admitted a patient into the ICU, they had to come see the patient within 2 hours.
Right.
And Dr. Westerlund admitted Sandy into the ICU at 5:30 in the morning and didn't come in to see her until close to noon.
Is that a rule that was in the state of Georgia? Right?
Well, no, that was an internal rule
In the hospital.
at the hospital.
The hospital. And that hospital was St. Francis Hospital.
That's right.
Okay. What was the end result of this case?
Well, the end result is the jury held the hospital responsible for the conduct of its physician, and they returned a verdict of $26 million.
What is that based on when you come up with that number? Because let's talk about a life care plan.
Sure.
What is a life care plan?
A life care plan is a plan of future medical care that a patient's going to need to give them the highest quality of life. It could include things like medicine, future surgeries, physical therapy, those types of things that help the patient recover their quality of life as best they can.
Right. And when we talked about the battle of the experts, generally the plaintiff trial lawyer, yourself representing your injured client, comes up with a number. And the other side comes up with a number too, don't they?
That's right.
And they're never the same, are they?
They are never
and
the
they're
same.
usually very far apart.
Well, even if the defense will even come up with a number, a lot of times they're concerned about putting a number out because they think it'll suggest to the jury that there should be a number. That's exactly right. That's exactly right. So it's our burden as plaintiffs' attorneys to prove the damages, and we do that with expert testimony, life annuity tables, all kinds of evidence.
How long was the jury out?
Total deliberation time was about 8 hours, started on Friday, broke for the weekend, they came back on Monday.
That's pretty fast, isn't it?
It's pretty fast. It's pretty fast. But they believed the case. They believed Sandy. One of the most memorable moments of the trial is after they returned a verdict and after the case had resolved, which it resolved that day, the defense agreed to pay the entire verdict to the penny within 30 days. But the jury came out of the jury box. They asked me if they could speak to Sandy directly. I said yes. Spoke to Sandy, and they formed a circle around her. They held hands, and they prayed with her. One of the most beautiful moments I've ever seen in court.
I'm sure the opposing counsel didn't like that, did they?
I would think not.
It reminds me of the movie The Verdict, where the jury came out. Is there any limit? Right?
Sometimes the jury will just connect with your client in a very special way. That's powerful.
When we talk about medical malpractice, you know what it is, I know what it is, but a lot of people don't know what that is. What does it mean, medical malpractice, and how common is it?
Well, the simplest way to think about it is medical malpractice is when a healthcare professional is not doing their job.
Right.
They're not showing up on time to treat a patient. They're not giving the right medicine. They make a mistake during surgery. They fail to follow the safety rules that are in place to keep patients safe.
Okay, but as a layperson, how do we know this? You know, they go behind closed doors, they're operating on something. We don't know what happened. How do we find out?
Well, it's very hard to find out sometimes because as you touched on, the medical professionals are not always forthcoming when they make a mistake, although they're required to be fully transparent. So what the patient is often left with is they have to find an attorney to investigate. They may not know if they have a case at all. They may suspect they do. You know, say a patient goes in for a routine operation and they come out brain damaged.
Right.
You know that something went wrong, but the doctors will look at you sometimes and say, well, that's just a known risk. Sometimes these things happen. So it takes hiring a lawyer to dig into the facts, examine the medical record, and get to the bottom of it.
In your career, have you ever come across a doctor, whether it was your case or someone else's, where the doctor came out and said, I did this, I screwed up?
It has happened, but it's very rare.
And when that happens, what happens to that doctor?
Well, usually when that happens, the patients won't file a lawsuit.
What about the medical, and no lawsuit, no insurance claim, right?
Well, that's part of the sort of counterintuitive.
Yeah.
The more that medical professionals are open and honest with their patients, and there's studies that show this, the less inclined the patients are to file a lawsuit. Because people do make mistakes. Sure. It's when people make a mistake and they don't own up to it and they try to hide it or alter the records to conceal it. You know, that's where people don't they get really upset about that, and rightfully so.
For everybody that's watching this show and they think they may have a potential medical malpractice case, they suspect it, okay? What is the very first step that they should do? And before you answer the question, let me ask you this. Does a patient have the right to get all of the records that pertain to them in this particular case?
Absolutely. They have a right to their entire medical chart. So the very first step is to get the medical records.
Do hospitals give it up easy?
They are required to. One of the provisions under the Affordable Care Act, sometimes known as Obamacare, is there is a federal regulation that requires hospitals to provide patients their entire medical chart in an electronic format, which makes it very convenient to show to a lawyer and to have it reviewed by a professional.
Yeah. How many potential medical malpractice cases and individuals do you have that come into your office that have already gotten their medical records?
Most of them have received some of their medical records. Now, sometimes the hospital or the medical facility will hold back certain records for different reasons. One reason being that it's potentially damaging information in there. So it does take some pushing to get the complete chart.
When a lawyer gets involved and they request the information, do you find that the hospital and the doctors more easily give up the information?
Usually. Sometimes they resist. Sometimes it takes follow-up letters. Sometimes it takes a lawsuit just to get the complete medical chart. That's happened before.
How do you evaluate? A lot of people say a doctor, treated me badly. This is a medical malpractice case. How do you evaluate whether you have a good case?
Well, the first step is to determine what the injury is. If it's a significant injury, then we'll go to the next step to get the medical records and examine it. And we do that by retaining the best experts in the country to review the case. And our direction to the expert is you tell us the truth of how you see the case. We don't give them any background information so that they're not biased as they review the case. Right. And if they come back and they tell us there's no case, or the doctor did the right thing, or this is a known complication, then we, of course, tell the family that, and the family is very satisfied to have that information because they can get closure and move on with their lives.
Right. Now, these are practicing physicians. Are they practicing physicians, these medical experts?
Yes.
So they are local. Is that correct?
They are not local. Well, rarely are they local. It's very difficult to get a local physician to review a case against a local.
Right, because if he decides to review a case, he's probably going to be testifying if the case goes to court, right?
That usually happens, but sometimes doctors will review a case with the understanding that they will not make themselves available to go to court. Some doctors just aren't willing to do that.
Yeah, but they are willing to make a report, put their name on it.
Make an affidavit and say, yes, there was malpractice. That does happen. But that's not typical. Normally, the doctor's willing to sign an affidavit. They are willing to go to court.
Yeah. One of the significant factors of this $26 million verdict is not only did it come in quickly, but it's a large amount of money that was paid quickly. Why was it paid quickly?
Well, you touched on it. That typically does not happen in these cases, but Georgia has a statute which allows the plaintiff's attorney to make a motion for attorney's fees after a verdict is returned, and the jury decides if attorney's fees are warranted. And there's a certain standard that they have to follow. In this case, we made that motion after the verdict came back, and the defense wisely made the decision to go ahead and pay the verdict and not allow the jury to increase the amount of the money received by the plaintiff, because this jury was obviously closely connected to the plaintiff and was motivated to do the right thing.
If a victim has a legitimate case, medical malpractice case, what is usually the time frame from the time they walk into a lawyer's office to say, would you examine this, would you review this, till the time they can end up getting it settled or go to court? What are we talking about, years?
There's a lot of variation there. Some on the shorter end, the cases can resolve as early as 6 months to a year. Typically, though, they can take up to a year and a half to 2 years to resolve.
In the interim period of time, oftentimes a patient is being hit with a lot of medical bills. What do you say, does a lawyer get involved with saying to the people that are looking to collect money from these victims? What do you say to these companies?
Well, that's part of my job, is to help the client not only prosecute their lawsuit, but to help them with all the things going on in their lives. Medical malpractice and an injury that can result, it devastates people's lives. It takes away their income a lot of times. It brings in an enormous amount of medical bills. So we get involved with their bill collectors and we say, look, there's a lawsuit, leave them alone.
Do they?
Most of the time they do. Most of the time, sometimes they'll ask you to sign a letter saying that if there is a recovery, that you'll pay us back.
Yeah, but do they agree the amount of money at that time, or is that negotiable?
It's negotiable. It's negotiable. It's part of the process of helping the client kind of keep their life together while they pursue justice.
And in many of these cases, some of these medical bills are enormous.
Oh, they're huge.
So do you get involved with negotiating them down?
That typically happens at the end of a case. If there's a recovery, you'll have all these insurance companies saying, we want our money, we want what we regard as our money back. And we'll negotiate with them and say a lot of things. Sometimes we'll say you're not entitled to it, or if you are entitled, let's pay a more reasonable amount. That's part of the representation.
Can you negotiate with Medicare?
You can. Now, they have a much stronger lien than a private health insurer.
Why is that?
Because they're government. It's just how the law has been set up. They're a government payer. So if Medicare's paid $200,000 for medical bills, then they have a lien for $200,000. But they'll typically negotiate with you.
But you can negotiate with that.
You can.
What advice do you give people who are watching the show, who suspect that they might be a victim of medical malpractice? What do you say to them?
My advice is to hire a lawyer to investigate. Lawyers who do this kind of work, the kind of work that I do, medical malpractice, we work on a contingency fee basis. So there's nothing out of pocket from the client.
And that includes the experts. They're expensive.
They are expensive, but we advance all the expenses for the expert witness fees in the investigation. So there's nothing to lose in getting answers. And one of the benefits of pursuing or investigating a medical malpractice case is just to get answers, because a lot of times the answer is your medical professionals did everything like they're supposed to. And if that's the case, then you can at least shut that door and move forward. However, if you find that there has been malpractice, then the client will have a choice to make. Is it worth pursuing? Is this the right thing to do? But at least you have a choice. At least you know what the truth is.
What happens to the doctors who, for example, in this particular case, Westerlund, what happens to his license, if anything?
That's a complicated question because a lot of times nothing happens.
And why is that?
Well, the boards that govern medical professionals, the respective board for doctors, nurses, they tend to be protective over the profession, and they tend to give great leeway to the medical professional. So even if a jury finds a physician responsible for millions and millions of dollars of damages, it's very rare to see that physician actually lose their license. For example, Dr. Westerlund, to my knowledge, continues to practice at St. Francis and continues to do surgeries and treat patients. And I'm not aware of any negative repercussions to his license resulting from this lawsuit.
I'm going to give you a figure that I read. 3% of practicing physicians cause 30% of medical malpractice cases. It would seem to stand to reason that if you cleaned up the 3%, I mean, these are not just one event, but repetitive, events that it would seem to reason if you got rid of the bad doctors, you'd improve the medical profession. But that doesn't happen, does it?
Well, I've seen the same statistics you just cited, and it does not happen. And it's unfortunate because most doctors are very good and caring and competent. My father was a physician. I've been in the medical community through my father and through other friends and family members for my whole life. And most professionals are very patient-oriented. However, there are a few who, as you pointed out, contribute disproportionately to the number of malpractice cases. And if those few were addressed by the respective boards, we'd see a dramatic decrease in malpractice.
Well, I want to thank you for being on the show.
Thank you for having me.
Congratulations on the case.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for joining us. You can get more information about our guest and the issues at insiderexclusive.com.